Today I'm going to talk about emerging cybernetic societies, and some of what I'm talking about hopefully you will not yet know. Who of you thinks we are finally living in the information society? Please raise your hands. What do the other people think?
What if we
I just wanted to say for those who believe that you need an update, because there's now the Society 5.0, which comes after the Information Society, which was after the Industrial Society, and that after the Agrarian Society, and it all started with a hunter-gatherer society. Why am I claiming this? Well, back in 2017 already, during the CeBIT, there was the announcement that Society 5.0 would be our future. And there are actually several books about it. So if you haven't come across, you can look into this. What is Society 5.0? Well, this is actually what results from the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the Industry 4.0, and that is basically characterized by cyber-physical systems, Internet of Things among others, and it's going to promote automation, not just of production and supply chains, also of cities, talking about smart cities. So what is Society 5.0 really about? It's a cybernetic approach. It's about automation. And you can perhaps imagine that our cities are being controlled through control rooms like this one over here. And eventually, not only traffic would be automated and controlled, but also increasing parts of society. So society would be automated and perhaps run from a control room for some time until everything is really running in an automatic way. So the principle on which societies of this kind would be based is code is law. Code determines what is happening, what can be done and what cannot be done. And so some people think part of it would be predictive policing and robot judges, and many don't feel very comfortable about it, including myself. Also because a British Secret Service came up with the Karma Police program, and so they were basically trying to judge your personality, your karma, based on what you do, including radio shows that you follow, and all sorts of things that you do on the internet, which would all be basically recorded and judged by points. And you would have a citizen score. That citizen score would determine your rights, basically. Some people even go so far that they suggest that we could basically replace democracies by something else which would be more efficient. So over here is a translation of a quote from a booklet called Smart City Charter, and that has been summarizing different contributions for smart cities. And it says here, as we know exactly what people do and want, we're talking about you basically, there is no need to vote. Behavior-related data can replace democracy as societal feedback system. Is this really what you want? At least there are some people who think we could go that far, and perhaps that would be more efficient. And it turns out it goes even further than that. Because not only would Industry 4.0 be characterized by artificial intelligence and advanced robotics, but also by gene editing. And so, what are the implications of that? So what I want to suggest is that there's a bunch of people, visionary people, who basically are working on the concept of an operating system for the planet. Computer code that would not run your smartphone or your computer, but basically the entire planet. And the idea is actually quite old. It goes back to Norbert Wiener. Even though his name is Wiener, he was actually been working in the United States. And he has already talked about relationships between cybernetics and human beings and also society. So the idea was born that we could basically run societies based on information feedbacks. So governance could be, according to this, replaced by cybernetics. And that means, politicians would not be needed anymore, administrations would not be needed anymore, police would not be needed anymore, judges would not be needed anymore. Everything would be based on algorithms. And you may not agree, and most people perhaps don't agree, but still there are quite a few people who are working on this because it would be a lot more efficient. And some people claim even a lot better because it would allow to consider a lot more data in the decision making. Now I'd like to ask, do we even need surveillance cameras? In times where we can use Wi-Fi to look through walls and see what happens on the other side. In times where we have smart meters, smart homes, and smartphones, where your smartphone has about 20 sensors that can collect all sorts of data about you and your life in your environment. So basically, we are already living in a time where you're being put under some kind of a microscope. And of course, privacy is at risk, and there are a lot of debates about it. But some people really do voluntarily collect data, for example, through wearables such as smart watches. Who in the room has a smart watch? Nobody? Oh, sure. Perhaps you need one. Well, why are people collecting health data? Well, because of course they want to be more healthy, and there's this vision that we would have eventually precision medicine or personalized medicine, where the treatments would be tailored exactly to you. And that means treatments would be more effective, side effects would be minimized, and perhaps we could detect diseases early before they really break out and cause much damage, and basically prevent diseases to some extent. And some people think in the context of this, all data would eventually be considered health data. And that, of course, has ethical implications. It's a lot of data we are talking about. If you want to personalize health, before we had basically 2,000 patients in order to make a medical study. If we want to make personal health, we would need 2,000 planets basically in order to personalize the treatment, unless you have another way of collecting data, and this is exactly what I will talk about. But before we do that, I'd like to ask you, whom would you share your intimate health and brain data with? A military? Secret services? No? The minister, the health minister, president of a country, chancellor of a country, big pharma companies, big IT companies. Maybe you're not into sharing data, huh? Your mom. Yeah. Who would share with your doctor?
Yeah.
Quite a few, not everyone. Who thinks you should be the boss over your own data and how it's being used? Basically, everyone, huh? So, it's really astonishing what we can already measure about health, even just with Wi-Fi, not even wearables needed. It's possible to measure your heart rate, among many other things. And there's a lot more in the pipeline. So I mentioned the Internet of Things in connection with those cyber-physical systems. These are systems where the real world and the virtual world grow together intimately. Internet of Things is based on sensors. Typically, you would not even see them. They're small, cheap, lots of them, billions, more than people on this planet, distributed throughout our environment and allows to collect a lot of valuable data that allow us to manage our world better. Now, in order to transmit so much data, we would need something better than Wi-Fi, perhaps Li-Fi, light-based data transmission. LEDs have been discussed, not only discussed, there is also technology for it, basically to transmit lots of data that can be collected. And then the question is, how would we process that eventually? And this is where quantum computers most likely increasingly come into play. And there are different ones, like Google builds some, D-Wave builds some, IBM builds some. And why is this happening? Well, for different reasons. First of all, you can do so-called multiverse optimization. That means if you're looking for an optimal solution, you can run many scenarios in parallel. And that is very favorable for the purpose. And there are many other applications of quantum technologies as well. So I mentioned IBM. Also, they're making quick progress in terms of the number of qubits that they can process in parallel. And then there is a slide which perhaps makes you think, which says bits, qubits, quantum bits, and neurons. So what have your neurons have to do on this slide? And this brings us basically to so-called converging technologies. So already kind of in the end of the last century, 25 years ago, in other words, people have been talking about the convergence between biotechnology, information technology, nanotechnology, and cognitive science. So our thinking was always part of the planning of converging technologies. And before I explain all this in more detail, I would like to ask you, in a slide that I've titled Nun geht's ans Eingemachte, now we're getting serious, is kind of a possible translation. How many manufactured nanoparticles do you think you're eating today? 2? 10? 100? Thousands? 100,000? 10 million? 10 billion? I will come back on my last slide to this. Okay. Back in 2004, there was a New York Academy of Science conference on converging technologies, co-evolution of human potential with technology. In the same year in Europe, we had this brochure, Converging Technologies Shaping the Future of European Societies. And it says nano, bio, info, cogno, socio, antro, philo, and goes further on the bottom. So it's this really an all-encompassing approach from the nanoscale to the global scale. That was back in 2004, 20 years ago. What has happened since then? Well, among others, the so-called Internet of Bodies. Back in 2020, the World Economic Forum informed us that tracking how our bodies work could change our lives. Okay, we probably believe that. Collecting our physical data via a range of devices that can be implanted, swallowed, and worn. And then a few months later, they said the Internet of Bodies is here. recent technological advancements have ushered in a new era of the Internet of Bodies, with an unprecedented number of connected devices and sensors being affixed to or even implanted and ingested into the human body. So your smartwatch is just one device. So what is an unprecedented number of devices and sensors? Well, this brings us actually to what the scientific term for the Internet of Bodies is, which is the Internet of Nanothings, or the Internet of Bio-Nanothings. So, in other words, Internet of Things sensors have become so small that they have reached a nanoscale. We're talking about particles of the size of up to 100 nanometers. That's a 10,000th of a millimeter. Much smaller than the diameter of a hair. You cannot see them with your eye. Fits into body cells. And this is the innovation. So basically we can ingest it through food, drinks, air, environment, and medicine. And if we would find a way to read out data in this way, say using a smartphone, then we could collect a lot of data about our body, our size, the body size, shape, the flow through the arteries, and all this kind of thing. So imagine this to work like when you go to a doctor and make an MRI. You will get a contrast medium injected into your arteries or veins, and then you can do the MRI. Now, what if we could do a similar thing, perhaps not as accurate, with radiation that we can produce outside of your doctor's place? And so this is what we're talking about, basically. And if you then ask the Internet what kind of nanoparticles are being used actually for the Internet of Bodies, then it mentions, among others, magnetic nanoparticles, that's number 3, and also carbon-based nanomaterials. And they are really beautiful, so this is how they look like. They're just a lot smaller, so you could not see them, as I mentioned before. Right, among them, carbon nanotubes and graphene, and also carbon dots. So there's also a scientific paper about the channels that you can use basically to communicate with the body. I should say I'm not talking here about microchips. So we're not being microchipped secretly. It's just dump particles, and it's using physics principles like refraction, absorption, or also stimulated emission in order to collect data. So these are just stupid particles, no battery attached, but still it's possible to read out data using physics. And then the question is, where does the energy come from for this? Among others, from 5G. And here's a comparison with the previous mobile communication network. So it's in a similar range, it seems, like previous frequencies. Difference is it's bundled energy. And there are additional ranges, as you can see over here, that we didn't have before. And that makes a lot of interesting things possible, interesting for industry. And if you want to make money with this, there's also the possibility to license this technology. And here is just one example. So this is from the Licensing Executive Society. And there's a description of basically how that works. This is not going to be the end. People are already working on 6G. And this is a scientific article which provides a survey for possible technologies of micro and nano machines used for molecular communication. That means really very precise, very targeted communication on the micro/nano scale. So, you can imagine with this data about your health, you can earn a lot of money. You know, we're talking about billions, if not hundreds of billions or more than that. And the question is, could it perhaps even be used in order to learn about what you're thinking about? And in fact, it brings us to the so-called Brain Initiative. Back in 2013 already, Obama announced this project. They wanted to put $3 billion into this. And interestingly enough, it was not only involving neuroscientists, but also experts in nanotechnology. And the goal was to deepen the understanding of the inner workings of the human mind and to improve how we treat, prevent, and cure disorders of the brain. There is, in the same year, a publication in a scientific journal which gives some more insights. And it says, nanoscience and nanotechnology are poised to provide a rich toolkit of novel methods to explore brain function by enabling simultaneous measurement and manipulation of activity of thousands or even millions of neurons. We and others refer to this goal as the Brain Activity Mapping Project. So, as I said, $3 billion were intended to be put into this. Another paper is already thinking about a human brain cloud interface. So it's really about human-computer interfaces or brain-computer interfaces. It's pretty precise about what he wanted to do, and also it estimates the channel capacity, how much information can get in and out. And there are also experiments, notably, of course, with experimental mice and rats, and they're using basically what they call neural dust, but that's nothing else than special kinds of nanoparticles that can be read out, in this case, in an ultrasonic way, but other methods could also be using other technology. So what you've probably seen several times is a picture like this. And what is really remarkable about this is those beams of light that are basically coming out of the brain or going in the brain. We can't tell. But the question is, what does it stand for? And I think it basically refers to optogenetics, which is actually perhaps the most interesting method of connecting with the brain. And this is from an Academy of Science report back in 2016, and they say optogenetics explores ways to stimulate genetically modified nerve cells using light pulses instead of electricity. Right, so now genetically modified, we're back to the slide I mentioned before. And here is a paper about wireless optogenetic neural dust for deep brain stimulation, and there's a Nature paper about optogenetic control of RNA function and metabolism. So it's really amazing what you can do. You know, scientifically exciting, technologically incredible, pretty futuristic. But what would that mean for our life? What would that mean for our future society? And here we have advances in deep brain imaging with quantum dots.
Right.
So what are those? Those are basically very small nanostructures that can emit photons in a stimulated way. Those photons can then be measured. It could also be measured using smartphones, as it turns out. And there have been papers already back in 2013 about the opportunity to develop real-time in vivo sensors. I mean, now we're going out from the lab into the real world, right? In vivo means kind of in the real life, basically. And 2017, another paper about real-time in vivo monitoring using magnetic nanoparticles I mentioned before, right? Then here's a paper in 2020, Panacea, an Internet of Bio-Nano Things application for early detection and mitigation of infectious diseases. DARPA is really leading in this area, so there's an in vivo nano platform. In 2021, there was this brochure about human augmentation that was published by the UK Ministry of Defence, and it's basically said it could be argued that treatments involving novel vaccination processes and gene and cell therapies are examples of human augmentation already in the pipeline, and the future of augmentation should not be decided by ethicists or public opinion, that means by you and me. In 2019 already, DARPA was commissioning Battelle to develop an injectable bidirectional brain-computer interface. And again, there is a DARPA platform which is called Next Generation Non-Surgical Neurotechnology. So it means you don't need to implant a computer chip into the brain of a person. Most people would not like to do that, or would you want this? So, from that point of view, it would be much easier to have technology deployed that does not need surgery, and they call it non-invasive, even though it would learn a lot about your private life, but they call it non-invasive because it's non-surgical, okay? So, you understand it's based on converging technologies, right? Now, all of that sounds like science fiction, of course. The question is, what does it mean for the future of society? And how far away is that future, So now we're trying to put ourselves into this future in order to be able to discuss about the framework that we need to create in order to make sure it's going to serve us well and not the other way around, right? So now assume that we could basically gather data from many people, big data about brain activities. Could then AI, given that it's very good at finding patterns in big data, could it even reveal patterns of thinking? Perhaps it would not understand what's going on, but it could find the patterns. And this could perhaps even be used in order to guide people in what they're doing. It's just triggering, say, it was about what to do next or where to go next. It's perhaps not that difficult to trigger that. Let's go a step further and ask ourselves, how many parameters would really be needed to control human behavior? Like 1,000? 10,000? 1,000,000? We would not even need to understand how the brain works. It's just about, if I do this, what happens then? How do you react? How can I trigger you to do certain kind of things? Could I measure this? Could I find out? Could the AI analyze it? So could we create a generative AI system that's not fed by texts or photos or videos, but by activity data? What you do, what can be inferred about brain activity, and figure out how to trigger you in order to do certain kind of things. Could I create a generative AI system basically to control society or somebody else who has the money and technology?
Terms of parameters, I would say. For society, terms less than that.
It sounds a bit pessimistic to me, but even if it was kind of 10 million for each individual, we could probably still do societies with generative AI systems today.
Because most people do the same thing over and over. What the bad mechanic of AI is that while you might only need 10 parameters, you actually we need 10 training. But one training, sometimes go with the discussion here.
Yeah.
So I understand what's happening. He said, "Chance of knowledge, what are you? Was like AI, then AI it would be listening."
It was for sure predictable that Peter would interrupt my talk. All fine. So, any problems if we could have that kind of technology? And then here, people are already talking about a new kind of society, which they call neurocapitalism. So, this would be about extraction and exploitation of our thoughts, perhaps even use our brain as an external device to do certain kind of things for the economy, for those companies who would have access to brains. And one could build a new political system, right? The question is why neurocapitalism and not neurodemocracy? Apparently, advertisers are already trying to hijack our dreams, so they're working on possibilities to influence our dreams to make us buy certain kind of products. And of course, you can imagine as soon as companies have access or states have access to our brains, a lot of new and bad things also could happen. There could be dual uses, perhaps crimes could be triggered, at least insider trading would be lifted to another level. You know, if I know which stocks you buy before you have even bought them, but I know you would buy them in a few seconds, you know, I could, of course, make money with that. To give just an example. So here they argue because of the power inherent in the technology and its potentially ruinous abuses, action must be taken before the appearance of the technology and not come as a reaction to it. I fully agree with that, but already back in 2019, an article warned us that brain reading tech is coming and the law is not ready to protect us. Well, in 2024, the cover of The Economist looked like this on the right, and you can see a detailed magnified and basically suggests that we would see brain monitoring, brain surveillance, right? I think that's the only way to read this graphic. Now, of course, experts have woken up to the developments and ethicists are taking action. For example, people are trying to push for neural rights to protect them, and the UNESCO was engaged in this, and in September 2024 they have finished this document over here and was handed over also to the United Nations, but in the meantime there are some countries who have pulled out of the UNESCO. Well, that is the situation like. So the problem is recognized worldwide on a global scale, really, on the top of the political hierarchy, but we don't have an enforcement to protect us from abuse of such technologies now or in the future. Of course, this technology is not only of commercial interest, but also of interest for military. And after all, they've been pushing for this hard for many years. And people argue we are already involved in a hybrid warfare, want it or not. In particular, a cognitive warfare, and our mind has been a battleground, basically, of international conflict. So, you know, the United States, Russia, China, and other countries are trying to make us think what they want us to think, and believe what they want us to believe, and feel what they want us to feel. But they have different perspectives, right? So they're manipulating our thinking in different ways. And same thing, of course, for the big tech companies and the advertising companies and so on. So no wonder people are feeling stressed. This article is already quite explicit about behavioral change as being the core of war fighting. It's not yet mentioning newer technologies, but it's already pretty shocking what is described in this article. Plus, there are books about military neuroscience and the coming age of neural warfare and mind wars and all this. So this should worry us. Here is a publication in the NATO proceedings back from 2019. It says, instead of devices connected to the internet, as in the Internet of Things, human bodies can be connected to a network with the potential to be controlled and monitored remotely. And even though that article says that they didn't have it back in 2019, the future would not be far away. Now, there are societal and ethical concerns that I have raised, but there are also scientific concerns. And I will mention the control center thing later on, but I'll start now with a dark secret at the heart of AI, which is actually the use of black box algorithms, right? They just don't have enough people to make models for all the data that they have. And so they use black box algorithms, unsupervised learning in many cases even. So those algorithms don't really know what they do. And I should say this can be still quite powerful in many applications. It has been shown many times. But the question is, does it always work? Does it work for complex dynamical network systems? As our society is one, our economy is one, ecosystems are one, our brain is one, our health is one. Is that really the right approach? And can we rely on it enough to trust that it will not damage our health while it's trying to improve it? Would you do that? Who would do that? Nobody. Okay, and then finally, in 2023, before Geoffrey Hinton became a Nobel Prize winner, he was getting cold feet, and he was leaving Google, and he was starting to warn of dangers ahead. He's been seen as the godfather of AI. Why was he getting worried? Among others, I think, because of a problem that is now well known, hallucinations. I mean, AI makes up things and sells it as a fact. And so we cannot rely on the reliability on what AI does. Also, Google CEO a few days ago said AI makes mistakes and we should be taking things with a grain of salt and perhaps also use other methods, which is a new way of thinking about how to use AI. I want to give you a very simple example really to illustrate issues from a scientific point of view. So let's take data of how people walk. Trajectory data can be easily recorded now with cameras. You can really create big data sets from this. And you can run machine learning on this data to learn how people walk. And in fact, those black box algorithms will come up with better predictions about how people walk than the classical model-based approaches scientists have developed. But it turns out it will miss the main point: to avoid collisions. So even though the prediction of the next step is better by machine learning, it will produce a lot more collisions. So it doesn't get the point. Now, suppose you would do the same thing with all the data of the world if you had a big enough AI system to learn the patterns in what people do and what happens on this world. Would it really get the important points? Or would it just produce something which looks so similar that you could not tell it apart from reality until you notice that an accident just happened? Or some of the accidents of autonomous vehicles, perhaps just because of that. There's too much black box modeling involved.
Okay. So, can you give me a sense of what is the point would look like then? So you learn something, but you say there's something else that you could learn that learns what's the point. So can you update me?
It does not figure out that the main point about pedestrian behavior is to avoid collisions. You know, I have to tell the system that. If I just give it the data, it will just fit data, and it will be good at fitting data, but it will not get the main point, which is avoid collisions. Then the question is really, how dangerous is AI already? You know, does it kill? So I mentioned basically those accidents of autonomous vehicles. There have been some terrible accidents, of course, and some of them quite strange, not well understood. And then there are other examples of the effect that social media have had on society. For example, those pogroms against Rohingyas, where people were killed. Lots of people, actually. Some people think it was because of bad social media algorithms that have created that conflict. Whatever you think about it, it's hard to question that, in fact, digital technology has not only improved the situations throughout the world, particularly for democracies. We see that digital technology, surveillance, among others, is being used to suppress people in many countries, and autocratic countries are spreading, democracies are apparently not doing so well. So the question is, are we really using this technology well? And also, if we take a data-driven approach, which is now often taken, what does it really mean for societies in the future, given that there are qualities that matter for us, you know, like friendship, love, freedom, creativity, consciousness, human dignity? Those are qualitative concepts, hard to measure. So if we build a data-driven society, what happens to those things? Do we forget about them? And that's my impression, actually. There are ethical issues, of course. There are lines, red lines that are being crossed. Privacy, self-determination, personal identity may be influenced or changed even. Militarization of bodies and minds. Nuremberg Code may be even violated, and human dignity is at risk. So what is human dignity about? It's really about the circumstance that humans should not be treated like animals, like robots, like machines, like things, or like data. Even though theoretically we can pretend we could do with humans what we can do with their digital twins, we should not do this because it could be very painful. And that's why we need ethics, that's why we need protection of people, because the computer doesn't mind what it does with the data, just cares about efficiency, doesn't care about what that really means for people. Okay, so this is an intermediate summary. So we've been turned into data mines for profit. And it's possible to collect a lot more data than you think. There's also smart textiles, among others. Large-scale manipulation by means of personalized information is happening. You may not notice it. Wi-Fi, 5G, 6G are not only communication networks, but also measurement networks. Could be used for control. Nanoparticles are also wearables. Some can be used to read out body data, and that makes us vulnerable, and human augmentation is of interest for the military. Obviously, many dual uses. There are also potential side effects on our health, so not all of those nanoparticles are necessarily very healthy. And I do think that we need to get back control over our own lives, and therefore also over our digital twins, because the digital twins can be used to manipulate our lives, our thinking, feeling, and doing, so we need to have control over those. So we need solutions for informational self-determination. If you want to read more about those subjects, there is a preprint. And so far, I would say the cybernetic societies that are emerging, there's so far semi-cybernetic, they lack sufficiently sound scientific foundation, they lack transparency, participatory opportunities, we don't have well-informed consent, we don't have accountability. I don't think the technologies and solutions live up to their promises yet. Not necessarily benevolent, discourage corrective feedback. And they tend to be having totalitarian features. So while I would agree that cybernetics has interesting potentials and that we want to combine it with synergy, do we really need to build a cybersyn approach, which is a control room approach? Or should we basically take a synergetics approach, which also brings those two concepts together, but in a bottom-up way rather than top-down, based on self-organization? This is what I've been working on my entire life: self-organization in pedestrian crowds, self-organization in traffic flow, self-organization of traffic light control concepts that outperform, as it turns out, top-down control through a traffic control center. So this is what I started with, the traffic control center. So in Switzerland, city of Lucerne, they have really put things to the test. So they had the state-of-the-art system, and you see it on the top. And they've measured the performance of that state-of-the-art system. And then my previous PhD student with the previous boss of the ZURICH Traffic Control Center, they've created an own company and implemented the solution down there. And it turns out much less waiting times. And not only for cars, but also for public transportation, for bicycles, and for pedestrians. So everyone benefited because this system was more adaptable to the real local needs. It was not wasting green time when it was not needed. Now, what should we do? Our president in Germany some time ago said we need a democratization of the digital world. And I would like to have a few slides about this. So, number one, I think information distortion is a problem. We have a lot of it at the moment. We have bubbles, hypes, fake news, disinformation, deception. Now, can we even see the world as it really is at the moment? Or is everything being bent by digital technology? We are now in a poly-crisis, obviously, at the verge of a third world war. We have economic and social problems. We have environmental problems, health problems. Like, are we really on the right way? Are we using technology the way we should be using it? So we've been thinking and publishing about the question, how can we build digital democracy? Democracy by design. And there are papers about it. There's not enough time to go into detail, but there are many design decisions that are taken by computer scientists every day. Think about it. Will it increase democratic opportunities or reduce them, you really can make a difference. I think democracy is about enabling distributed knowledge and collective intelligence. And one of these issues is how can we support massive open online deliberation to allow more people to have a positive impact on what we're actually doing. Swarm intelligence has been very inspiring to people. We also talk about collective intelligence. Goes back for more than 300 years, the fable of bees. And there's lots of work about the wisdom of crowds. So the question is, what does it take in order to bring the best ideas of many minds together? As it turns out, if you do it the wrong way, then things get worse. For example, social influence can undermine the wisdom of crowds. And that's why we actually need to organize the process in a certain way. So what I believe works better than just let anything happen is to organize into several phases where we have an independent exploration in the beginning. That means that people look for their own solutions without talking to each other. It's very difficult now because search engines are personalized. So you cannot anymore have an independent view of the world if you use kind of the most popular search engines. Anyway, suppose people come up with a diverse set of solutions. Then only in phase 2 there would be an information exchange. They would tell each other about what they found. And phase 3, they would try to integrate different solutions, combine them to come up with even better solutions. And that actually works surprisingly well. So there's a very nice example. The Netflix prize has really shown that diversity wins not the best. So for a long time, competing teams have tried to meet the condition to win the prize. They all didn't succeed until one team decided to combine their best solution with solutions of other teams which were performing worse. Who would do such a thing? You would probably think that we should reduce the performance of the solution, but just the opposite happened. So they combined the benefits of different approaches, and they were immediately winning, and other teams were combining solutions too, and they also improved a lot. We also have a theoretical paper about it in PNAS, Optimal Incentives for Collective Intelligence, where it's really important to explore many different dimensions in order to be able to make a good estimate. We call it just turning around the minority report idea, kind of the top-down control system. We combine it to a minorities report, a bottom-up approach, and that would actually improve everything. So don't mess up the two concepts, okay? Phase 4, if there are different integrated solutions, we have to vote. And importantly, the most popular voting approach, majority voting, turns out to be one of the worst voting methods. The various issues, among others, it will not create spatial fairness. Among others, because there are higher densities in the city center, so there are more voters, and so basically, if you do participatory budgeting, which we'll discuss in a moment, then most of the money just goes to the center, and you have a situation where there's a city hinterland divide, there are banlieues, social problems would come up because the outskirts of the city would basically not see much money, okay? So we need better voting rules, and the question is, what can we actually change in the voting rules? And it turns out there's different parts of it. There's an input method, so how can people express what they want? How can they express their preferences? This then goes into a ballot box. Typically, and then there's an aggregation process that determines a democratic outcome. So input and output method. We've created an app in order to do experiments. We've looked into different kinds of voting methods, among them approval voting, also combined approval voting, where you can vote against something or abstain. We've looked into rank voting, where you change the order so your favorite options are on top. And a way of distributing points, so-called cumulative voting, where you can indicate how much you like a certain kind of option. Okay? Again, that goes into the ballot box, and then the question is, how do you aggregate? And what happens when we do majority voting, we basically distribute money and until the money is used up. In this case, it's just two options that use up all the money, but this approach did not even consider how costly those different options are. Instead, what we can do is we can divide the cost by the number of votes, or the other way around, and then basically look how popular are certain options as compared to the cost. And then we get a different outcome. In this case, using the same money, we can actually implement 4 different projects and not just 2. And then there is an approach that's called the equal share. So you get a virtual amount of money, everyone gets the same amount of money, and that's being distributed over projects. And this is the way the projects are determined that will be implemented. So, importantly, there are different democratic voting methods, and they produce very different outcomes. On the left, you see that basically one project eats up almost all the budget, and there's unfortunately no money left for anything else. While the other approaches in the middle on the right allow to support several projects, and of course, most likely people would be a lot more happy about that, because people have different interests and preferences and needs, and so that can be matched better by several projects. And this kind of thing has been done in many cities around the world over the past years, called participatory budgeting. It's very popular altogether. We have also done that in Aarau, in the city of Switzerland, where the citizens themselves could make their own proposals how to spend money that the city would make available. So there were brainstorming sessions, people were putting their solutions on the map of the city, and in the beginning there were more than 150 proposals. And over several sessions, some of them were merged together and others were taken out because they could not be realized realistically for whatever reason. And eventually there were 33 projects that were realistic to implement, and people were voting about it. And this is the outcome. So you see basically those projects that had particularly many votes as compared to the cost of the project that made it. Now, importantly, 17 projects were chosen as compared to 7 projects for majority voting. So people were paying a lot more attention to costs. The projects were a lot better distributed over the entire city. Every district of the city would get a project supported. And it was a lot more inclusive in terms of more younger people than usually participated, more older people, more foreigners, and more women. And this was considered very favorable. And altogether, I'd like to say that democracy can be upgraded. Here we had more approved projects, more resourcefulness, more participation, more inclusion, more transparency, more trust, more satisfaction, and more fairness. So that's better than optimal. We've been even applying voting to traffic light control. So basically, we assume that people have different kinds of preferences. Some want to minimize travel times, and others want to minimize numbers of stops, or you could think of further goals that some people may have. And at each intersection, basically, there would be a voting procedure, could be done also automated by the cars. And the interesting outcome was that, as compared to a situation where you optimize just for one thing, which is the usual approach, like you optimize for efficiency, then you have, see the blue triangle, 100% efficiency, but the other variables that may be of interest, such as sustainability and resilience, may be performing very poorly. While if you basically have a voting that considers the different preferences at each intersection, depending on the mixture of people who are there at a certain point in time, then you get the solution that is performing highly on several dimensions. So we get a pluralistic solution. We don't get an optimum just for one goal, which is really important for complex societies. And one further thing that we were doing, we were focusing not only on deliberation and voting, but also on co-creation. And so just suppose there's a platform where you can design a house or a quarter of a city, and you can come up with your own urban planning designs. You don't have to do everything yourself. Your neighbors can contribute, your colleagues can contribute, your friends can improve solutions. So you get a branching of different solution proposals. This is the peer production phase. And then we have many proposals eventually to implement. And the question is, how do we review that? It's impossible that everyone looks at all the proposals. And so we have a peer review approach where everyone has a look at 5 or 10 proposals, and this allows us to make a short list. And then everyone finally votes on the top 10 list. And even though nobody has seen all the proposals, we can be sure, for mathematical reasons, that the outcome will be performing very highly. It turns out also that if you have the choice between sharing data or not, it's much better if we pursue an open source approach. It will maximize the evolution speed, the innovation speed, and also will increase fairness among people. Okay, I am coming to the end of my presentation. Here's perhaps a book you want to have a look at, Next Civilization. There are some things that you can do. You can take a value-sensitive design approach. You can build tech that focuses and protects human rights. You can build freedom tech. And I think we should replace the social engineering and benevolent data approach by assisted self-organization, symbiotic co-evolution, and by boosting serendipity. I mean, basically creating lucky coincidences and unexpected opportunities. Now, coming back to this question, how many manufactured nanoparticles do you think you're eating today? Quite a lot. 10 to the power of 10, and perhaps more than that. Just talking about engineered, manufactured nanoparticles, not all the rest, okay? I wish you bon appetit and good health.